Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the show today. Well, I'm not sure what to think about our guest that's coming on because his new book, Walking Among Us, has been interesting. I'm going to say interesting, but I am looking forward to talking to him because his topic is the alien plan to control humanity, which is really kind of scary to me. But we're going to find out because you know me, I got my 500 million questions to ask him. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today. I have two quick announcements. So this just got put on my calendar. If you are in the New York area, and so you would need to be listening to the show currently, at the end of September, I actually am going in for an event. Find me on Facebook, send me a message, and I can get you some more information about that. I don't really want to put too much because it's kind of a private event. Anyway, if you're in the New York area, come check it out. And also, I have released a new YouTube video. So if you go to Just Energy Radio on YouTube.com, the newest video is Evidence of Alien Intervention in Antiquity. That's the new video, so check it out, along with the other videos that are on the Dr. Rita Louise Presents playlist. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest and get him on the air. David Jacobs is a retired professor of history at Temple University in Philadelphia. He has also been a UFO researcher since 1966. In 1973, he completed his doctoral dissertation in field of intellectual history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison on the controversy over unidentified flying objects in America. This was one of the first PhD degrees granted involving a UFO-related theme. So please welcome the author of the new book, Walking Among Us, the Alien Plan to Control Humanity, Dr. David Jacobs. Hey, David, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
There you are. Did the aliens get you again?
I can't fight them off.
I am so excited. You know, I go through all the books of my authors, and your book, I'm about 3/4 of the way through. I mean, I've just been kind of fascinated by this whole topic that you are putting on the table, and I am really looking forward to spending this time with you. But let's start easy. I mean, you're a retired college professor, but how did you kind of cross that line and start investigating UFOs and actually getting a PhD in UFO-related topics?
Well, the doctoral dissertation was on the controversy over UFOs. It didn't make a stand whether UFOs were real or not. However, if you read between the lines, you could tell that it was obviously a real phenomenon. In fact, before it was published as a book a year later by Indiana University Press, or 2 years later, I should say, and they sent it to a bunch of different people to look at it, and the one who gave it the best reading of all was Carl Sagan, and the reason was because he alone read between the lines and realized that I thought that the UFO phenomenon was real, which in fact I did. But most people did not pick up on that, and it was tough. I mean, most people who read the book just realized it was just a straight book. But once you start looking at the evidence that I brought forward for the existence of UFOs, that the Air Force in particular and other governmental agencies were looking at, it was sort of a bone-crunching a crush of information about actual objects that were flying within radar and within sight and landing on the ground and this and that, and you put that all together and you realize something is happening here. Now, I must say that I had been interested in UFOs early on, as you pointed out, and so when I got to Madison, Wisconsin, for graduate school in '66, that's pretty much all I thought about. Even though I wrote a master's thesis on a totally and completely unrelated topic, I still was reading stuff about UFOs and talking about UFOs throughout the entire time. And finally, after working on a dissertation for about 6 months about the image of women in early film history, pre-1915, in fact, I decided that, what I want to do is write a book about the history of the UFO controversy, because the only one that had been written beforehand was published in 1956 by Ed Ruppelt, who was the head of Project Blue Book for the Air Force from 1951 to 1953. So that's what I wound up doing, and when I graduated eventually with my doctorate, I just kept at it. I just got even more interested and more interested and more interested. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I was interested in abductions. They were fascinating. There were a few cases known. There was Barney and Betty Hill and that, and after the 1973 wave of sightings, there were more cases known, and in 1975 there was a Travis Walton case. I thought that the Travis Walton case was a hoax. I thought that there was a case in Pascagoula, Mississippi, where two guys were taken on board a UFO. That made national news, and I thought that was a hoax. I told my friend Alan Hynek, who was the dean of UFO researchers at that time, that those two cases just didn't pass the smell test for me. In other words, I had no idea what I was doing. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't until 1982, when I met Bud Hopkins, that I began to get interested in the abduction phenomenon. I had never met an abductee, and he introduced me to a group of them, and he showed me what he was doing, and I was sort of astonished at how many people he had with him who had undergone his hypnosis and a psychologist's hypnosis who he used, and recounted these events that had happened to them. And after that, after 1982 and 83, I was hooked. And it wasn't until 1986 when I began to do this myself. I had sat with Bud Hopkins at in his own regressions and copied down every word he said and all that sort of thing. And I finally was ready to do it. And in August of 1986, I did my first session. And a couple of things happened in that first session. The first thing was I I had a little tape recorder, that little cassette tape recorder that I put next to this woman, and I sat behind her. She was on a couch in my living room, and I sat behind her with a 3x5 card in my hand with an induction written down so I wouldn't forget a single word, see? And besides that, I didn't want her to know that this was the first time I'd ever done this. I wanted her to think I was a pro or something like that. So we did a regression. Now, she was very, very much into channeling. And in fact, she used to hold seminars to teach other people how to channel. So she went directly into this, quote, trance, end quote, a misnomer if there ever was one. And she was actually, she remembered being on she was like 6 or 7 years old, and she was at a field with a friend of hers. It was at a park, and it sloped down, and down at the bottom of the slope there were some boys playing baseball down there. And all she knows is she leaned over to look at a buttercup or something, and she felt arms around her. She felt herself lifted up into the sky, and that's essentially what she remembered. So we did a session on that. And this session was on that memory that she remembered consciously. And there was a guy named the guy who grabbed her had a page boy haircut, and I thought to myself, that's interesting. And not only that, but she had a name for him, which was Cosmo. And they put her on a table, and they took her clothes off, or he did rather, took her clothes off as this little girl, and he examined her all over, and he did this and that, and there was a gynecological procedure that she was extremely embarrassed to talk about. Then he got her off the table, and he walked her down a hall, and she met a gray alien in the hallway, and she was required to put her hands out, her arms out, and touch the gray alien's head. And when she did that, she felt love and warmth and affection emanating from him. And then when she took her hands away, it was gone. They continued to walk down this hallway. They walked into another room. There was a group of aliens forming a kind of council, sitting at a table. And they told her that when she grows up, she's going to be brave, courageous, strong, and true, a real American, and all that sort of stuff. And then they got her clothes back on, and she came back. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've done it. I have done a regression with an abductee. I've got this abduction story. It's the most astounding thing ever. And I was thrilled to death. And I decided that night I was going to take the tape up to my computer and transcribe it. The problem was that I had thought that the computer's little tiny mic would pick up every word she whispered.
Oops.
You could hear me fine on it, but you couldn't hear anything that she said throughout the entire session. And I literally felt the blood rush from my head. I almost fainted. It was like, oh my God, I've lost it. This treasure, I've lost it. And but she came back for another session.
Well, since that time, I mean, it's, your book, Walking Among Us, I mean, it's filled with these kind of sessions.
Well, there was a process I went through, and let me just say these last few words and you will understand. She came back for a number of sessions, and after about several months, I said, Melissa, remember that first session we did? She said, yeah. I said, well, I had a little trouble with the microphone, as I felt like an idiot, I must say. And I was an idiot, in fact. And I said, can we do that again? And she said, sure. She's bending down. She's looking at the buttercup. She feels the arms around her. There's a guy with a page boy haircut, takes her up. His name is Cosmo, puts her on a table, does this, that. There's a reproductive situation that goes on there. She's very embarrassed to talk about it. Puts her clothes back on, takes her back down.
So kind of word for word from the first one?
Right. I said, well, Melissa, remember you walked through a hallway and there was a gray alien, your hands on his head and all that? She said, no, I don't remember that happening. I said, well, what about when you went into the council room and there were these people, these beings sitting around, how you're going to be a wonderful person when you're an adult? He said, no, I think that happened to a friend of mine, not to me. And I knew at that time that I didn't have the slightest idea what I was doing. And I was believing everything she said right from the get-go. That is a fatal error in this business, so to speak. And then I put in controls, vowing never to let that happen again. Even then, it still happened a certain time. So getting correct stories that have reality to them from abductees is not as easy as people think. It's not that they just remember everything just straight out. It's a little bit, there are difficulties with it, and you have to be very, very careful. And but I've now done, I've worked with 150 people, and I've looked at about 1,150 different abduction events, and I think I'm fairly adept at it now.
Well, that sounds great. In your book, I mean, it is filled with these stories. So you said that you worked with about 150 different people. In working with these individuals, and, we're going to obviously get into more detail about the details, but did you find commonalities in their stories? There are people, I'll just say it this way, there are people that say, oh, they saw that on TV. So they're just kind of repeating what they saw on TV, or they saw something online or on YouTube or whatever. Do you find that, based on your observation, that there is commonality? And do you feel that what they're saying, it has no relationship to what's being reported in the mass media?
Without commonalities, there would be no abduction phenomenon, period. It would be idiosyncratic. Everybody would talk about what happened to them depending on where they were born, depending on whether they were hung by their feet every night before they went to bed by their parents for the next 10 years. Everybody would be different. That would not be a good environment to study this phenomenon. Most of what people tell me has never been in popular culture, even to this day. And so I know what's on the tube. I know what's going around and all the rest of that stuff. And those are two things that are always a little bit worrisome. But when somebody tells me something that I've never heard before, it goes on the back burner, waiting for other people to say the same thing who are not aware of this testimony. And but the more, the better, in fact. And so, as you read through the transcripts, and I have a lot of transcripts in this book, you'll see that there's a bunch of people. Nobody had heard anything like this before. Believe me, I didn't talk about this at all in this regard, although I did do a few talks about it. But it's never been on television or anything. And they're all saying exactly the same thing in the most mundane situations imaginable, like how to sit in a upholstered chair, or what a refrigerator is for, or a whole host of extremely mundane things that humans, especially in advanced societies, know automatically just because they watched it when they were babies. In other words, they know why food goes on a plate, whereas the people who are describing things that are happening to them have hybrids, if I may just say that word, asking them, what is a plate for? Why do you put food on a plate? So it's unusual.
Yeah, that's why I'm like 3/4 of the way through this book, because it's just like, get out of town. So let's back up. And so I think my listeners, for the most part, have heard of Greys. Maybe they've heard of like the reptilians, or, they're the praying mantis guys. But maybe you can kind of give a rundown of the beings that have been presented to you by the abductees.
Right. In my first book, Secret Life, I did sort of a rundown on different beings, and I did the same thing, only in much greater detail in my second book on abductions called The Threat. And this book, though, goes even further into it. And what I think I'm looking at is not so much different types as a smooth spectrum of change, hybridization, so to speak. The ones who are in charge are the insect-looking ones, who I call insectolins. They people say they look like praying mantises. That's the most used word for them, and that's probably fairly close to accurate. They are the brains behind the outfit, I think. This is speculation, but there's evidence for it. They call the shots, and they know what they're doing. Then comes gray aliens, who I think were originally, I'm guessing at this, created with human DNA and alien DNA of some sort. And then eventually, once the initial group was done, that either the hybridization continued or they were cloned. Since that book has come out, I'm leaning more to being cloned, because they all look alike, essentially. It's very difficult to tell one from the other. There are taller ones and there are smaller ones. They all have jobs to do. They all have tasks, and that's all they do and all they think about, most of them anyway. Then you begin to get the standard hybrids, beings who look really alien, but they have a little bit of whites in their eyes. They have a tiny little mouth. They have a little tiny nose. They have a pointed chin. They have very large eyes with black eyes, but with these little whites in them, and very, very thin hair. Then there's sort of this progression to ones who were sort of look halfway between human and alien. Then they eventually get to ones who look quite human, only with enough differences to make them odd a little bit. And then eventually you get to ones who are really looking human, but their brains don't work in the way in which ours do. For example, a security hybrid who only thinks about security of other hybrids and of abductees not saying anything about what they're doing. And there's nothing else in that being's brain other than the security. And eventually you get what's called a personal project hybrid, which I talked about in The Threat, who's been with a woman oftentimes since she was a child and continues to monitor her. And what I call hybrids are sort of the last one. Hybrids are human, period. Everything about them is human and average. They all look average. They look normal. They look just like anybody else. They're 5'9" approximately. They're between the ages usually of 17 and about 24. And there's only one slight, barely noticeable difference. And the difference is they can control humans totally and completely, and we cannot control them. They can make humans think whatever they want them to think. They can make them do whatever they want them to do. They can make them forget whatever they want them to forget, and so on and so forth. That difference makes hybrids a different species, and it makes us a second-class species, because we cannot do that, unfortunately. And this is how you control people. You control people eventually one by one, but eventually you can have a whole heck of a lot of these hybrids moving into society, controlling an awful lot of people, just regular people.
Well, we're going to come back to that because I have a couple of questions on that whole topic. So let's go back to the hybrids. And so there are the stories of, people going on board and having genetic material taken, sperm and eggs. Were these hybrids created using that genetic material? Yes.
In the first 2 abduction events that we ever heard of, the Antonio Villas-Boas case in Brazil in 1957, and the Barney and Betty Hill case in 1961 in New Hampshire, there was a reproductive aspect to them. people did not recognize it as such, but when we look back now, we can see that Antonio Villas-Boas, who was what we thought was at the time an illiterate Brazilian peasant, talked about how he was forced to have sexual intercourse with this female there who looked quite human, and Barney and Betty Hill. Betty had what she said was a pregnancy test, although that's probably not what she actually had. She said the aliens told that to her. It's probably not what they said, because that they don't do pregnancy tests. That's just not done. However, she had a needle stuck in her navel, and we know that that's probably going towards the ovaries and just taking out follicles from the ovaries. But Barney had sperm taken from him. He was so embarrassed about it that when the book Interrupted Journey came out about their case in 1966, he had the author, John Fuller, take that part out, which was wonderful for us because nobody then could claim when they said that they think they're having sperm taken from them, no debunkers could claim, well, they got it from the Barney and Betty Hill story.
Right.
So we knew that there was a reproductive aspect early on. As it turns out, the illiterate Brazilian peasant was actually a law student who became an attorney. He died young, unfortunately. I think he was in his 50s, but he never varied from his account. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me ask you this. So, we know, I don't want to say for a fact, but for a fact that this program had started in the late 50s, early 60s. So in your opinion, okay, there's definitely an opinion thing, or maybe somebody's talked about it in one of your sessions, in order to go from looking, very gray, like in physiology, to being one of these hybrids, are we talking about multiple generations of genetic engineering? Like we have a hybrid that mates with, more human genetic material. Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah. First of all, let me just say we can date this back with a degree of certainty to the last quarter of the 19th century, and I can date it back with greater certainty to the 19-teens. And my colleague Bud Hawkins did a session with a guy, something happened to him in the 1920s. This was years ago. And I worked with a couple of people, and we did sessions of things that happened to him in the 1930s, and a whole host of things after that in the 1940s. So it goes back a little bit further than the 50s, but we could say it's probably goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. Now, I'm sorry. What was it? What was the second one?
Are there multiple generations?
Okay, multiple generations.
In order to get the more human-like hybrid, does a hybrid have? Do you take a hybrid and give it new human genetic material to make it be less gray and more human?
Yeah, I have the perfect answer to that, actually. I don't know. My guess is that that's the way they do it, yes. I think that's the way, but I do know that all the ones who would stand out here, who would look odd or weird here on Earth, have other jobs that they do. They have other tasks to perform. So I'm not sure whether they are hybridized to a degree just to do that task, or if it's just a matter of they're just in the pathway towards the ones who'll be moving in, who I call hybrids. And so I wish I knew more about it, but all this is sort of, it's material that abductees do not know. And so there are only ways of finding out is what they know. And there's a whole sort of back world of the UFO abduction phenomenon. In other words, there has to be a place somewhere on board, we would assume, where they make food for hybrids, they have to eat something, and especially the hybrids, the ones who'll be moving in. And we do have indications that they eat things, but they've got to be made somewhere. They have to have a place where there's certain what I call hybrid garb that they wear, these very plain 3/4 length sleeve sort of dresses for women, and usually a beige or off-white color, and for boys, for men, just these sort of pants and shirts that are also beige, all totally and completely nondescript. There's no concept of design in any of the things that they do. So we know that they have to make those clothes somewhere. In other words, there's got to be a backstory here, which we only have a few accounts of. We have not really a lot to know about it at all. And what you're saying essentially is all this backstory of how they do these things. Well, what kind of an assembly line do they use and all that, and we just don't know that. I wish we did.
I guess you're not that talkative, huh?
If people don't have a need to know, they don't tell them.
And I'm going to jump somewhere like so off topic of your book, but so on topic of what we're talking about. But since you're a history professor, you I don't know if anyone's ever asked you this, but according to Sumerian mythology, other cultures' mythology, but I'm going to point to that one in particular. Texts like the Enuma Elish, and there are some other ones, really seem to indicate that genetic engineering was utilized to create humanity. And in reading this book, it makes me go, well, I wonder if this is part of the next phase of the project.
My own feeling is I don't think so. I think that this is new and different. I do think this dates back only to the latter part of the 19th century. I think that if it dated back much more throughout the earlier parts of the 19th century, there would be some sort of indication. People would be writing about odd things that were happening to them. They would be describing aliens. It would be in the society, it would be in the culture. And in the 18th century, the same way, perhaps. And in the 16th, 15th, 14th, 13th, et cetera, and down. But we really don't see anything like that whatsoever if it's an ongoing phenomenon and started very early on. So the evidence for me...
I'm putting out, like 3,000 BC, 5,000 BC, like... Psh.
Yeah, and by that time, regular humans, Homo sapiens, had been formed for last 100,000 years or 200,000 years or whatever it is. It's not a question I can answer.
Okay.
I really, my sense of it is that it's a modern phenomenon. My sense of it is that they came at a certain time, and they did certain things at a certain time in order to get set up. And I talk about that actually in the last chapter. And they discovered us probably fairly late on. And they're doing things to us now that we don't like. So,
well, and where my brain went, we have stories of Zeus having sex with earth women or demigods. We have that whole narrative, and to me, that upgraded the genetic material on Earth. So you're saying, oh well, they're infiltrating, and my brain goes, well, I wonder if they're upgrading our genetic material by sending in this group that start interbreeding with Earthlings to, infuse this other piece of code. That was my thought. But
yeah, that there might be a case for that. The problem here is that these hybrids, or hybrids, as I call the ones who are moving in, have absolute loyalty to the insect-like ones. It is the insect-like ones we have to worry about. It's not so much the hybrids. They're worrisome, of course, because they can do whatever they want with us. But the leader of the pack, so to speak, is the insect-like ones. They do not tell the hybrids why they're doing things. As one hybrid said, my task is to live here. And that's all he knows. That's all he knew, was that was what he was supposed to do. And so that's, hang on a second, a cat scratching his claws here. So that's what we have to pay most attention to, the fact that we don't really know what the final outcome of this will be. The hybrids don't know it, because the ones who are the insect-like ones just don't tell them. There's no reason to tell them. They don't have to know. They just have a task. The hybrid society, the alien society, is extremely structured. Independence of thought, independence of movement, independence of virtually anything is practically non-existent on board the society in a UFO.
So kind of like a hive mind?
It's got tiers of information, and it kind of is like a hive mind, but everybody has a certain tier that they're on. All the tiers are jobs, essentially, tasks. In other words, hybrids who look sort of half and half, who look halfway between a human and an alien, most of their tasks, from what I've been able to tell, involve taking care of young babies who are also hybrids, or taking care of small children who are also hybrids. That's their job. That's what they're there for. That's what they do. And that's basically all we ever see them do. Now, abductees don't know this. All they know is what they're telling me. They don't know that I've heard this 100 times already from other people. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So the best thing we can do is we can say that this is a rigidly structured society. Everybody has their tasks, and they are built for those tasks. Just like the hybrids are built to move into society. You know, I used to say that walking among us was my favorite question to be asked. Do you think they're walking among us? You know, and I loved that question because I got to say, absolutely not. There's no evidence whatsoever that they are walking among us. And I felt sane then. I felt like, yes, I'm on solid ground. This is good. Now it's my least favorite question. Now I have to say, well, yeah, we think it's possible. Yes, they are walking among us, just what I didn't want to say. But abductees couldn't give a whit about what I say or don't say, you know, or what I think or don't think. And the odd thing is that the concept of walking among us was presented to me in 2003. It wasn't like I was hearing these from the beginning and just didn't believe it. It wasn't like that at all. Although there were hybrids who were coming down here, personal project hybrids and others who were doing things, but they weren't moving in, learning how to drive, things like that, becoming citizens. There wasn't anything like that. But starting in 2003, I began to hear it. And then from one person, and I put it on the back burner. I said, nope, this is not evidence, not yet. Then another person told it to me. Then another person. These people did not know about the original or anybody's testimony.
Oh,
then
so
one,
this
then another
coming
one, then another
to
one.
the Earth is really new, based on your interaction with these abductees.
I'm sorry, would you please repeat that? I just didn't quite hear you.
Sure. This activity, them coming and wanting to live on the Earth, is within the last not even 20 years of this whole phenomena.
Right. That is correct. And I think, and I found it in a bunch of people who live. I live near Philadelphia. Philadelphia abuts onto New Jersey and so forth. And so, in my corner of New Jersey and southeastern Pennsylvania, if this is happening there, it is not possible that the aliens from somewhere, from the planet Vortek or whatever, would come down and decide that they were going to start integrating people into the society just where I live, in southeastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey area. That is not possible. This is a global phenomenon. This is happening around the world. I've worked with people from Europe and from Latin America and from Asia. It doesn't matter. Now, once again, I don't know what's happening in some countries like North Korea. I don't know what's going on there, and I don't know what's going on in Thailand necessarily. But I get email from abductees all around the world, and there are abduction researchers in other places in Europe and so forth. And consequently, this is a global phenomenon. It's happening everywhere. I've just discovered it here, but that means nothing.
Well, now you made me wonder, if, you mentioned Korea, so I'm just going to use that word. If the abductees or the ones that are trying to infiltrate onto the planet, if they are being produced with any kind of ethnicity.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Most people never even think of that. My guess is yes, because they have to blend in. And if you're 6'9" in Japan with blonde hair, I just don't think you'd be good at blending in. So my guess is that the Japanese abductees provide the sperm and the eggs, and the rest is done by the aliens who are working that area, and they're having probably the same ethnic variety as we find around the world in different countries. The critical event is not to stand out. They emphasize this all the way through. Do not stand out. What that means is, and people write to me and tell me these things all the time, is that they met some weird guy. He was really weird. He had weird eyes. He acted weird. He did this. He did that. And he's probably a hybrid, they tell me. And the answer is no. That is exactly what the aliens don't want. They want somebody who looks just like everybody else, nondescript, who doesn't say stupid or crazy things, who knows how to walk and how to talk and how to do everything else, just average. And so, but there's an awful lot of weird-looking human beings walking around. There's millions of them. So people can rest assured that if they think they saw a hybrid walking down the street or whatever, or acting weird, it's just some weird-looking, weird-acting human.
Yeah. Any thoughts of how many there are? And I'll break it down into some numbers, like on the ship of the hybrids. And then since we're talking about the ones that have come to the Earth to interact, any idea how many of them there might be?
Excellent questions. And once again, the answer is don't know anything about it.
All right. Well, hey, I'm trying.
But I love that, because here's what's good about not knowing. If
we don't get so scared.
No, it's much more general than that. Here's the thing. With abductions, they're happening or they're not. They're happening or they're simply psychological. People are inventing them or they're happening. There's nothing in the middle. It's not like UFO sightings where you see something and you might be mistaken. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's nothing in the middle like that. With this, if this were psychological, people would simply make up all sorts of things, like where they come from. Nobody knows where they come from. You'd think they just make that up. It would be one of the first things they said. The guy came into my room. He said his name is Casimir, and he comes from the planet Xanax, and he comes in peace, and here's a gift, and that sort of stuff from the 1950s concept of what aliens would be like, which is still bizarrely enough, a concept within the scientific community. They have this whole sort of idea of what it would be like if aliens were to come that is primarily based on popular culture, if you can imagine that. But the fact is,
it's on the internet. It's got to be true.
Yeah, that's right. So, but in fact, abductees simply don't know that. So I don't know that. We don't know anything at all about numbers, about time, about countries, or things like that. And the reason is because the hybrids who are in contact with humans on a human-to-human level, except in being controlled and all that, they don't know those things either because they didn't have a right to know. Their job is to be Americans, let's just say, or be British, let's just say, or French or whatever. And they do that extremely well. And if you think that, and if you decide that, this person is a threat, they will calm you down very quickly, and you won't even realize it. They'll think, look at that person. I think that guy looks like a high. No, he's a good person. I like him a lot. I'll just be on my way now. Being able to control people gives them a power that is unfathomable to us. It's like telepathy. My guess, and this is my guess, and I know that people will throw rocks at me for saying this, but if telepathy were a real phenomenon, and let's just say 1% of the population, and 99% it wasn't, we probably would live in a very different society than what we live in now. Because that 1% would be able to become so powerful that nothing could stop their abilities. All they had to do was tap into a person's mind and see what was there. If only 1% of the people had that kind of a telepathic ability to know what they're thinking and all that, everything would be different. We wouldn't live in the same society we live in now. The ramifications of that are mind-boggling. Now what we're looking at is much more than just that. It is putting images in people's minds and making them think whatever these beings want. It is doing whatever they want to people with impunity. It's not just sort of an upgrade of humanity, because humanity is already pretty much upgraded. I don't know what's going to happen a million years from now, but it's pretty much upgraded the way it is. And I think that we are able to understand. Not me, obviously, but there are people who are able to understand most anything, and that's pretty good. And I think if we had enough information about technology and and how these beings get here and all that, we probably could figure it out. Maybe not. But the fact is, though, that scientists, if I may go back to that, get hung up on things like time and distance. They can't get over the fact that the universe is gigantic. Why, it's the biggest thing in the world, so to speak. And and not only that, now there might be multi-universes for all we know. Zillions of them. But what they say is, even if you travel at the speed of light from our closest stars or whatever, you'll never get here. It'll take, 9,000 years or 600 years or whatever it is. They can't get here from there. That's the concept. They can't get here from there. And the answer to that is, that's not the question. That's a stupid question. That's the dumb question. The real smart question is, are they here or not? That's the question. How they got here, I don't know, and I don't care, to tell you the truth.
I mean, it's nice to know, but it's gonna like we can go and send some nukes over there or something. To do something about it.
Right. One would hope. But they would probably not be able to tell us where their planet actually is unless they had a 1,000 astronomers and astrophysicists surrounding them to try to figure it out. Because their names for planets or stars or whatever it is are not going to be the same as ours. So, but But in terms of technology, they have to be extremely advanced. They can't be just sort of a little advanced. They have to be extremely advanced compared to us. And the reason is our technology is brand new. Brand new. It just happened. A lot of the stuff that's brand new technology occurred in my lifetime. And if you want to say that our technology is only 500 years old or 700 years old, okay. That is nothing in cosmic time or geologic time. It's zero. It's a laugher. Mm-hmm. If you say that these beings achieved technology just a little bit before we did, just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit before we did, they would have technology that seems like magic, as scientists like to say. That it would be beyond our ability to deal with. Or investigate or anything. It would just be beyond us totally, because there aren't levels of learning that we haven't got, that we go through for the next 1,000 years to get to that kind of technology. If, however, their technology was just a tiny split second in cosmic time after ours, they would have no technology whatsoever, zero technology. No.
Like that. The fun technology. Hi, whoever that is.
Sorry about that. I'm going to unplug this thing.
Hey, that's sounding pretty alien. Are they going to take you to their leader? Okay.
Theoretically, that should fix it. Sorry about that.
We have a question from the chat room that I'm going to throw out, and we have about, I'm going to say 7 minutes till we need to go to break. And this is from Analog Hole, and I'm going to add in one other little piece to this. The question is, have any abductees made doctors' reports available where women have been pregnant and the fetus goes missing unexpectedly? And then I'm going to throw on, or any kind of forensic material from these beings.
Yeah, this does happen. This does happen, and I actually had an interesting story. Hold on a second.
The aliens turned his phone back on.
Sorry about that.
Did the aliens turn your phone back on?
Well, I've got 3 phones up here. The phone I brought up from downstairs, talking to you earlier, and then 2 other phones, and
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Well, it has to do with. Yeah, okay. Repeat the question. Just
have any abductees made doctors' reports available where a woman has been pregnant and the fetus goes missing?
Right. The question is, doctors' reports available? No. But I have talked to doctors who have experienced this, and to abductees. The same abductee went to a doctor. I talked to the doctor. And what this means is, when people have sperm and eggs taken from them, women report, and they've reported this for decades now, that an embryo is inserted into them. Between 9 and 11 weeks later, the embryo is removed. The fetus is removed, I should say, and oftentimes they don't even realize that they're pregnant. They might know that they missed their period once or twice, but sometimes they think, well, it is not possible, impossible for me to be pregnant for various reasons, like there's been no contact with a male. So consequently, they can't be pregnant. So they think it might be something else, and something is wrong, or stress, or whatever. Every once in a while, a person will say, I know I'm pregnant, and I know it's from them. And they'll take a home fertility test and all that, and it shows positive. They've gone to a doctor, had a blood test, it is positive, and then they elect to abort. They're not going to have what they think is an alien baby in them, and it could very well be. And in one of these cases, they told me about it first, and I recommended the doctor, and I told the doctor, who was a gynecologist, what the situation was. I've been talking with him before, and so he was prepared. And what we prepared for was to take that fetus out before the aliens did, and send it to another physician who was going to look at it, and so there'd be two different physicians and so forth. And everything went according to plan. Everything was fine. There was fetal remains that they tested for. It wasn't a pregnancy that was in the fallopian tubes. It was a standard pregnancy. The pregnancy, the fetus was a male to a guy named John Altshuler, a physician now deceased in Colorado. And he was going to do testing on it. So a week went by, I didn't hear from him. 2 weeks went by, I didn't hear from him. 3 weeks went by, I didn't hear from him. And then I saw him at a conference. I said, John, what's happening with the fetus that we sent you and all that? This is important stuff. We got to know. He said, what fetus? There wasn't any fetus there. It was just liquid. And we're trying to grow cells in it. They're not growing. And I said, no fetus. That's not possible. Well, see, a lot of physicians don't actually see the fetus when they take it out for whatever reasons. And it just goes into a sort of bag or whatever, or container. And then it's, I saw the physician here in Philadelphia. I ran into him in a supermarket, and I said, Dave, I said, I just talked with John, and there was no fetus there. And there was nothing in the packaging. There was no cells either. And he looked at me, and his jaw fell to the floor. He was astounded because this had all been planned out. I didn't have anything to do with any of this. It was all planned out. The packaging, the everything, and how it was going to be done, on and on. It was on dry ice, and this whole thing. And the woman was pregnant. So we came close, but no cigar, as they say. Came close, but no cigar.
Well, I think that doctor needs to get some hypnotherapy done to find out who stole that embryo fetus.
The embryo was almost certainly taken out as late as the day before the procedure. The problem was she knew that the procedure was coming up.
Oh.
The best thing to do is to get a willing person, to go to a physician right now. Let me take you to a physician right now and have this procedure done. That would be different.
Right.
Now,
I see what you're saying.
That happened once, and this was the very first person I ever worked with, Melissa. She told me that. This was years ago. This was back in 1986 or 87. She told me that they were coming and they were doing things to her, and this was happening and that was happening, and she suddenly felt a pain in her groin area and in her near her ovaries, but not quite, and the pain was so severe, it was getting worse and worse and worse, and then she couldn't sit down. It was so severe. So I called up the gynecologist. I grabbed her. I went down to where she lived in central Philadelphia, and we went over to the hospital where he worked at, which is also in central Philadelphia. And this was all done on the spur of the moment. No time for anything else to happen. And she the whole time was saying to me, it's an implant, and they're gonna take it out. It's an implant. It's an implant. Now, this is early on, and for me, an implant was something they put up somebody's nose or in their ears. A metal object. So I wasn't sure what she meant by an implant, but she didn't want anybody to touch it, and she was very, very frightened, and she didn't want to have any doctor touch it, and she wanted to leave it alone and don't touch it, and on and on and on and on and on. We get to the hospital, and she's still into that, and we had to finally convince her we're not going to. All we want to do is look at it, just look at it, and we're not going to take anything out. So she said, well, okay. So they go into this, there's a room filled with, there's a room where there's a monitor, and you could see a sort of like, not really an X-ray, but you could see inside what was going on and all that. And there's a group of radiologists staring at this screen.
Okay, but on that note, we're going to come back to there's the radiologist at the screen, but we need to do a little cliffhanger right here because we need to go to commercial break. Okay?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to David Jacobs about his book, Walking Among Us.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages. And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. This hour is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. And please do stop by the Soul Healer site. That's www.soulhealer.com, where you can find out about the books and the products and the videos, and there's free articles, and you can sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep you informed of who's coming on to the show. How's that? It's awesome, I think. So we've been here talking with David Jacobs about his book, Walking Among Us, The Alien Plan to Control Humanity. And David, when we went to break, we were talking about the radiologists are staring into the screen, and you walk into the room and what happened?
Well, they called me in. The physician, who was a friend of mine, called me in and said, I want you to take a look at this, David. And I looked there, and they're all standing there with their mouths open, gaping at this something or other that is off to the right of her right ovary in an area where there shouldn't be anything. It was a circular thing, and there was something in this circular thing, and they had no idea what it was. It was just they were astounded at what they were looking at. So he said to me, well, it looks like it's organic. And I thought, organic? If it's an implant, it's going to be made out of metal. How can that be possible? And then he said, bring her back in a month and we'll look at it again. So we said, okay. So she walks out. She says, I'm never coming back. I'm never coming back. I don't ever want to go back to the hospital again because they're going to take it out. They're going to find it and they're going to take it out. And I finally got her to come back. He said, bring her back in a week. I finally got her to come back in a month, actually. And they did the same sort of looking at the screen. They looked at the same area again as I saw it. The hole was there. What it was in was missing. In other words, what had been there had been taken out, but the cavity was still there. So they all gaped at that, and the gynecologist said, well, it looks like it's resolving itself. I had no idea.
I said, you think?
Yeah, right. Well, I learned later, and I wrote this up in my book, The Threat, that they will insert fetuses in a variety of different areas. And it's not just in the uterus. It's also in areas that are outside of the uterus, extrauterine gestational areas, and that people have told me about and that I've learned about. So I guess the story of this is all about the fact that these things really are happening to people. This is not just something that is just out of people's minds. Now, in Walking Among Us, what I do with that book is I try to show how abductees are helping these hybrids get into society. In other words, they have to have a place to live. How they get apartments, I don't know, but they all seem to have apartments before they bring over the abductees who I've worked with. But they have to furnish the apartments. They have to go get furniture. Sometimes they have to assemble the furniture. Then once they get the furniture, they have to know where to place a table. They have to know all sorts of things that we would just take for granted that the abductee has to help them with. For example, if they have a bed, the bed has to have sheets and blankets on it. And then it has to have a pillow. All this is new information for many of these hybrids. And they have to learn this. They have to learn how to, when they go to the store to get something, how to buy something. They seem to have money in some way. I guess they just ask people for money, and the people are more than happy to give it to them. But they have to.
That's kind of scary.
It happens. It's part of the deal. But when they come up to the cash register, and the person behind the cash register says something bizarre like, "Hi, how you doing?" They have to know what to say. One hybrid just stood there looking. It was like he was confounded with this "Hi, how you doing" business, and he had to be instructed. Well, you say "Fine, how are you?" or "Okay," or whatever. You have to respond.
Don't they do any training on the ship before they?
Yes, there is training, but when you get here, there's 10 zillion things that they don't have up there that they can't train for. It's astounding how much they have to learn that people know automatically just by living in this society. They learned it all by osmosis when they were kids. But this is different. One woman went very late at night, drove a hybrid to a 7-Eleven store. Actually, here in Pennsylvania, there's a group of them called Wawas. It was a Wawa store, but it's a convenience store. And he wanted to know how to buy something. And she had put some money in her coat, but she's a naysayer. She always says, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to help you, on and on and on. And then eventually she winds up helping them. But she's the only one who was in Secret Life, my first book, The Threat, my second book, and this one. She's the one who made it into all 3 books, the one I've been working with since 1987. And so he bought like a piece of bubble gum or something like that, a stick of gum or a package of gum. And he gave the guy some money, $1, whatever it was. And first he didn't have any money, and he asked her for the money, and she said, "Oh, well, I don't have any money." And then he said, "Well, I saw you put it in your pocket." And they reached in, they grabbed it out of her coat pocket. And so he gives him the money, and then the guy makes change, puts the change in his hand, and reaches out to give him his change. The hybrid freezes, looks at Karen, and says, "What do I do? What do I do?" She says, "Well, I don't know what you do. I don't know." In other words, he did not know he's supposed to accept change, that there was change coming. Once again, these are the oddest, the craziest, oddest things to not be aware of, but that's standard procedure in this situation. And he just grabbed her and ran out of the store with the guy still holding the money out. And they need abductees to help them through these intricate processes of buying a package of chewing gum or something like that. But if you've never done it before and never seen it done and have no idea how to do it, it can be a little one of life's lessons. But other people have taught them how to drive cars, how to do everything. If you meet somebody they have apartments, and it's a parking lot of the apartment, and the guy says something to you, you have to say something back. The guy says, "Hey, how you doing?" You got to say, "Fine, how you doing?" Something like that. And then once one hybrid got into a conversation, and he had to go to the abductee and have the abductee sort of decipher things for him in a very, very, very strange way. My favorite story, and there's lots of transcripts, I must say, so reader beware, but my favorite story of all these is a kid comes down. He's about 10 years old. Now, when kids come down who are Hubrids, who'll be moving into society, many of them actually spend some time in people's houses. So a kid comes down about 10 years old, and he wanted to see the kitchen. So she takes him into the kitchen. The caretaker is with him, too. And he's extremely interested, for example, if I can remember this one, in the rollers on the drawers. When he pulled out a drawer on the side, they have these rollers, you know. That just sort of amazed him. It was fascinated him for some reason or another. And then there was other things he was interested in. Then they come into the living room, and the hybrid caretaker, who's older, you know, sits on the couch, as does the abductee, sit on the couch. The kid sits in an upholstered chair. But when he sits down, he sits bolt upright. And the caretaker says, sit back, sit back. And he sits back. I might be getting this a tiny bit wrong. He sits back, but he doesn't touch the back. He's still bolt upright, rigid. He says, the caretaker says, well, sit like us. And the kid doesn't want to do this. The abductee realizes that the kid is afraid that if he leans back, there will be no backing. He'll just fall through the chair because he has never sat in an upholstered chair in his life. So she has to tell him, no, there's wood back there. There's a backing. You won't fall through it. So he gets up off the chair. He goes around the back and he feels it. Oh, yeah. Okay. And then he slowly but surely inches his way back to sit in the chair, and he's okay.
You know, I just think that whole thing is so interesting, that these advanced aliens that are so organized and controlled wouldn't have better simulations on their ship. It sounds like our military has better simulations than these guys. Oh,
absolutely. But that's what the abductees are for. That's what they do. And cheap these labor. Beings learn.
Sorry, I was just making a smart-ass comment. Oh. Don't mind me.
Well, these beings learn extremely well, and they remember everything. You don't have to tell them but once. But the point about this chair is, who would think, if this is a psychological phenomenon, how would one come up with a story, which would not be true, of a kid sitting in a chair? I mean, who would even think to make that a story? You know what I mean? It's so it's so bizarre, it's so off the wall, and it's so mundane that you just can't. I couldn't believe what I was hearing when I first heard this. But I've got tons of them, stories like this. Most of them are still in my files, you know. So the abductees have a job. It's not just giving sperm and eggs and holding babies, like I've talked about in the threat, and touching babies and talking with babies and this and that, and having toddlers and playing with toddlers on board. It's not just that. It is helping these now fully grown Hubrids get an apartment and know everything about the apartment, teach them how to shop, teach them how to drive, teach them how to do things, teach them what an egg is, teach them. One hybrid wanted to know if you cooked a loaf of bread, because everything else seemed to have to be cooked. Teach them, no, you don't do that, you know. And there's a million different things that they have to teach them. But each one of these hybrids has several, if not more, abductees they deal with. So there's it's not just the one abductee, although they can be with one abductee for a long time, but they're not with the one abductee all the time. They're with other abductees as well who are teaching them also.
So based on the amount of abductees, it would sound like you would need to handle this population with it not being a one-on-one situation every day, like going to school. I mean, do you think that this phenomena is so widespread through the human population?
I do think it is widespread through the human population. I get emails from every state in the union, and I think that every state, depending on the number of population it has the same ratio of abductees in it. Now you have to understand that the way it works is the abduction phenomenon is intergenerational. So if an abductee marries a non-abductee, and I'd say 95% of abductees do not know that they're abductees, although they know they led odd lives, but they think that's the way life is led. But when they get married and they have 2 kids, those 2 kids will be abductees. When those 2 kids get married and they have 2 kids, those 4 kids will be abductees. So you get a spreading out in the society as the population increases. When that happens, you need more and more gray aliens to process abductees as the population increases. And that's why I'm becoming more and more used to thinking of the gray aliens as being cloned as opposed to just being hybridized. So you have this vast program just in the United States, and of course it's worldwide, and continuation of making abductees on Earth and processing them on board UFOs, and it's the good, the bad, the ugly. It's everybody and it's anybody. I've worked with people who have PhDs and MDs and LLDs and scientists and engineers and on and on and on and on, attorneys, and all of whom know that by coming to me, they are in essence outing themselves to a stranger. And they know that if anybody knew that they thought that they were being abducted by aliens from another planet or from outer space, this would not be the best thing that could happen to them in their careers. You know what I mean? Particularly psychiatrists and psychologists. That's all I got to say. I've been abducted by aliens. I just don't think that their clientele would beat a path to their doors, but they need to know what has been going on throughout the course of their lives. It starts in infancy or early childhood. It goes all the way up into old age. It stops somewhere in old age, maybe at around age 80, maybe 75. I'm not sure, but we don't see really old abductees, and we should. It's something that it's an assembly line situation, and every aspect of it has been planned out. This is not just a catch as catch can situation. This has all been thought through. In the last chapter of the book, it's a speculative chapter, but I answer the questions: are we the first planet that this has ever happened to in the history of the universe, you know? And then I give about 8 or 9 reasons why that is not possible. And I ask other questions about why did they choose this planet? Or I can't ask why questions, but how they chose this planet, or questions of that sort that have never quite been asked before. And all the answers are speculative. But it gets people to thinking about this subject in a very different way than anybody else has thought about it since the beginning of our knowledge of the subject. The problem is also is that I'm just one person. I need other people to say the same thing that I'm saying, you know. But there's very few other people who do this kind of research. There's 4 or 5 of us around who know maybe a little bit about how to do it. And then there's about 9 million other people who have no idea how to do it and try all the time and just ask the wrong questions and assume that people are telling the absolute gospel truth, even though and the people who are abductees think they are, but they're wrong, like Melissa in the very first story. and people who try to push this into other unusual areas where it isn't, and think that it's all about healing, and it's all about the wonders of the universe that was going to be introduced to us. We're going to join a group of nations and become a member of this planetary confederation and all. That nobody has ever said anything like that to me, even remotely, in all the years I've been doing this. Not even remotely. They don't do that. It's not part of the alien agenda. So there's problems with believing it. There's problems with doing it, and there's problems with continuing to do it, unfortunately.
Okay. I want to go back to something we were discussing, and you probably don't know, but I'm just going to put it out there, as just commentary, I guess. But it seems like it would make more sense to send them down younger, where they were able to integrate easier. I mean, you take a young child from a third world country and you bring them to the United States, and they learn to integrate quite easily. And it seems like it would, you take a teenager and it's just harder.
Absolutely. And in fact, they're moving in from, as I said, starting around age 17, they're moving in 3s and 4s. Now, there are other ones who are just moving in alone, but most of them are moving in 3s and 4s. Here's my theory. They're extremely concerned, from one abductee to the other, with violence. They don't want to have violence directed towards them. Now, you'd think, well, if they can control humans, there's not going to be any violence directed towards them. The problem is being a hybrid. When we take a look at how aliens control abductees on board a UFO, they do so in 2 major ways. The first way is just controlling them from afar. That has to be done. They cannot get away from doing that. Without that ability, there would be no abduction phenomenon. They have to control the environment that the abductee is in, whether the abductee is in a car with people, whether the abductee is in bed at night with a husband or a wife or whatever, or people in the house, whether the abductee is at a picnic. Everybody has to be controlled. Then the person is taken. Everybody is released from control. They think, well, where did George go? He must have walked off or somewhere. And then they go looking for George, and looking for George, and they can't find George anymore. And then a couple hours later, they find George. George is back where he was originally. And he's saying, well, where were you guys? And they say, well, we were looking for you, and that sort of stuff. So the environment has to be controlled. That means they can do it from afar. At the same time, they can not only do that, but they can hook into an abductee's eyes through the optic nerve. I wrote about this in The Threat, and use it as a conduit to sort of excite any other neural area in the brain, any neurological area that they want. So their ability to understand human neurology and neurons and all that sort of stuff and which ones do what is fantastic. It's unbelievably good. Now, that ability of staring at the eyes and controlling people and all the rest of that stuff is very, very, very strong with the insect-like ones. When you get to gray aliens, it's strong. The ones who are taller gray aliens are much stronger than the ones who are smaller gray aliens, but they're both pretty strong. When you get to sort of early stage hybrids, it's still strong enough. Middle stage hybrids, still strong enough. Late stage hybrids, strong. Still, it's less, but still strong. When you get to hybrids, it's not as strong. And so when humans get out of control violence, it takes the 3 young ones together to control that human. And there have been several instances I was told about that the aliens talked about in that regard, and which is why they were so concerned with violence. And it's not just that one young hybrid can control them all. They had to do it in concert. And so that's a little bit of a worrisome thing for them. But most of the time, they're not involved with violence, so it's not that worrisome. But they do bring it up from time to time. Now, when they're living together and they go out together and they walk together and they do this and that together, my guess is they're ready to go anywhere. They can do anything. But going into a high crime area at night in a park is probably not the best thing to do. And so I think they've learned that. The abductees have told them that, and so forth. But it's this whole world of assimilation into the society that is not like other immigrants. It's not the same. It is different. There are similarities, obviously, but this is a whole different ballgame. This is something that is extraordinarily unusual. Professional people tell me the same thing. They understand how crazy it sounds. Everybody understands how crazy it sounds, and yet it's happening.
It does sound really crazy, but I have gotten to where if there is enough corroboration from unrelated sources all telling the same story, it makes me go, okay, well, then maybe it's something that I need to pay attention to.
Right, and that's why I have as many transcripts in the book, because they're all sort of corroborating each other all the way through, and without that, as I said, there'd be no book, and there'd be no Dave Jacobs, or there would be a Dave Jacobs, a much happier Dave Jacobs.
Now, why would you be happier not writing books?
Because I look at this phenomenon. I used to be thrilled when I first started out looking at UFOs back in 1965. And so I think, my God, this might be contact, contact from another planet, contact. Oh, my God, this is amazing. This is incredibly good. I was thrilled to death. And I was always thrilled with UFOs. I thought it was great. And then when I began to hear about the abduction phenomenon, which I didn't believe, but even then I thought, well, if they are doing it, it's just, because that's what we would do if we were, looking at another planet. We'd catch some of the wildlife down there and pull their legs off and see what's inside, and all that sort of stuff. But the more I learned about it, the more uneasy I became with it. And then I learned a lot about it over the years. I've been doing this for a long time now, and then I began to fear it. Then I began to be depressed about it, and now I really I will be glad to get out of this business. And once again, I don't charge anybody for anything I've done, and anybody can come as many times as they want. So I will be glad to just sit around and watch television all day long. That's just fine with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you've opened the door, so it's always going to be in your mind. But
that's true. That's true.
But let me throw this one out. There are people that suggest that our world leaders, I'm going to say are reptilians or some extraterrestrials, or somehow connected. Do you think that they have infiltrated politics, and do you think some of the craziness we see going on our planet, GMOs, chemtrails, whatever, the dumbing down of America is also part of this plan?
No, I don't. I think it's too early for anything like that widespread, and these beings have no idea what government is. They have no idea that the country that they're in is called the United States of America. It has to be told to them by abductees if they're interested. They know nothing about it. The abductees explain to them what a television is and how to use it and things like that. So being in the inner workings of the government, I just don't see it. Besides that, every single person who's in the government, we know everything about. Everybody has to be cleared in some way, and you can't have a period of childhood where nobody has seen them ever, where they weren't on the face of the earth. That's just not going to happen. I have a cousin who became special assistant to President Kennedy on foreign affairs, and even in 1961, they knew everything about him. It was just astonishing where they had gone. I mean, he'd made a trip to Russia once, the Soviet Union. They went to the Soviet Union. They interviewed everybody he talked to there. He wasn't a government official or anything like that at the time. And they did everything. And if they found that there was a huge blank somewhere where he was living on a UFO, it would have attracted their attention. I guess. I don't know, but I don't think so. I think that this is a different kind of invasion. This is not an invasion where the takeover of the government is involved. I think that will eventually happen just through osmosis, because government people, I'm sure that there's plenty of people in the government who are abductees, and they're having kids who might want to go into government work, and they're abductees, and and pretty soon they'll be helping hybrids and all that sort of stuff. So, but my guess is that is not the situation. My guess is that this is an invasion, so to speak, a takeover from inside, not from top down.
Okay. I'm just trying to get all those questions answered. I'm looking through my questions here. Actually, let me ask the one that was in the chat room because it was kind of interesting, weird. All right, this is from Neutron. And he said that I should only ask if I feel like it fits in, but I'm just going to ask it. Have you ever had an abductee who was found to have multi-layered screensavers of their abductions and eventually talked about an entity of high-level hierarchy appeared during an abduction described as a sad humanoid and having a beak-shaped mouth?
Well, the answer right off is no. I've never heard of anything like that. A humanoid probably would not have a beak-shaped mouth. They would. The genetics of it are just wouldn't work out that way because most people don't have beak-shaped mouths. They would be fixed well, I don't know. Maybe there are some who do. I've never seen one. But and also, how could this person tell that he was higher up in authority in some way? You have to know the whole rigmarole of who's higher and who's lower and all that, and that's not normally known. And the hybrid would not think of things in those terms. If he were to say it, he would only think of what his task was. He wouldn't think of the hierarchy. That's a foreign concept to them, basically. They all are bred for certain jobs, and they're happy to do them, So here's the situation. When people are abducted, they remember bits and pieces of things once in a while, if they do at all. Most abductees don't remember anything ever, but the ones who I see have bleed-through memories. Now, people say, well, conscious memories are usually the best kinds of memories and the most accurate. The reality is that they are the least accurate of all memories. And when people remember things, they get things wildly out of joint. They add dream material, they add imagination to it. They don't think they are, but they do. And if they're not, they leave huge chunks of it out. They get other chunks wrong. They get the timetable wrong. And I've learned that no matter how much invested in a conscious memory a person has, I never do that conscious memory as the first session. It's too important to them. They've been thinking about this thing for 25 years, this event that happened to them, and all that happens. And so I wait until the fourth or fifth session, until they're used to hypnosis. That takes one session basically, but until they get used to my style of questioning, which is purely chronological and logical. If you got from here, if you're going through the window, are you going straight out through it? Are you going up diagonally through it, or are you going down through it? That's straight logical questioning. I would even go into going through a window and what that means, and the import that has, the enormity actually of what it means. But when I finally do what I call a triggering event, the event that they've been thinking about for years and years and years and years, and they want to find out what happened in that event, it's pretty much the same as all other events. And they remembered it wrongly. And they understand immediately, this isn't the way I thought it was. And I've had this happen over and over and over and over and over again with me. And it's just because they begin to learn about the phenomenon itself, and they learn that everything is logical. And when they go from in a logical basis, the things that they thought happened didn't. And then they remember something about how they might have thought this and they might have thought that at the time, and it got mixed up. And so, hypnosis is tricky, and it's just a relaxation techniques, and then you ask questions. But it's very tricky, and one of the main problems that people have when they do this kind of work is that they tend to believe everything the abductee says at face value. That is, to use an archaic phrase, a fatal mistake. It's you can't do that. You have to wait. You just can't do that. You particularly if it's a bizarre, off the wall account. Usually there's other things have happened, or it's different, or whatever. That's not saying the person wasn't abducted. I'm not saying that at all. But you have to be very careful about what you hear. You cannot accept at face value things that are said to you or that you see. For example, the two main areas of confabulation are a description of aliens and recounting of alien dialogue. So people will see weird-looking aliens that have horns in them and this and that and on and on and on. And when you do hypnosis with me, they realize they're not seeing that. That's where confabulation takes place. Confabulation. Let's go back to Betty Hill, and I knew Betty Hill for many years, and of course I know her niece Kathy Martin, but I don't think that they told Betty Hill that what they were doing when they inserted a needle in her navel was a pregnancy test. I have never heard that phrase again in 1,150. Well, I shouldn't say that many because men don't have pregnancy tests no matter what. But let's just say in 800 sessions with people, or whatever. I've never heard that, not even once. Although the needle in the navel is a very common procedure. So the problem here is telepathy. If all communication is telepathic, what's to prevent abductees from hearing their own thoughts and thinking they're coming from the outside? And the answer is nothing prevents that at all. And it's done all the time. And it's up to me to catch that. That's because that's not the way aliens talk or whatever it is, And so you have to be very, very careful. And not only that, but a lot of researchers they have an agenda. They're not agenda free. The agenda might be healing or environmental healing or raising humans to another level or all those kinds of things. And that's in their minds. That's not in abductees' minds. And you can't ask questions that relate to that because you're requiring confabulation as the answer. You just have to. You can only ask questions about what the abductees specifically tell you, and then you can ask them general questions, warning them that this is a general question. So if it's happened, it's happened. It's not, it's not. before you left the ship, when they're walking you down the hallway, did they take you anywhere else? That's a pretty general question. Most of them say no, and sometimes they say yes, and then it leads to a whole other series of events that happen. But the question is amorphous enough for them easily to say no, and most do. So, but you have to be very, very careful, and you can't even ask that question after you have 4 or 5 or maybe even more sessions with people who also now understand the problem of confabulation once it's pointed out to them. So there's a methodology involving recovering abductee memories that will be the subject of my next book. It's a long story to tell you I'm writing another book.
Have you heard any? No, it's okay. Have you heard any stories? Especially as we move forward, of these hybrids. Hybrids, which are the last stage hybrid, actually starting to create relationships with humans, and where I'm really going with this, creating sexual relationships to start creating a race here on Earth.
I have not heard that specifically. It's entirely possible, but I have not heard that because Huberts haven't told me that. And they don't tell that to abductees either, as far as I know. That's their other part of their lives that happens when the abductees aren't around. I think they deal primarily with abductees who have been patterned, essentially, to help them. However, I have 2 books left in me. One is How to Do Hypnosis with Abductees, and the other one is about a guy who got himself into a peck of problems because they couldn't stop an abductee he was working with from talking to this guy, and so they went after the guy to try to stop him. Now, the guy happens to be a very close personal friend of mine, so to speak. So in other words, it was me, and that will be another book.
So kind of like your memoirs, the aliens were chasing me down the street and
something like that. But it never progressed to that. However, it was the most frightened I had ever been in my life, I must say.
Well, I look forward to hearing that narrative come out in print.
Well, one of these days, if I can just stop watching television all day long, I'll get to it.
Well, okay. The people that are being abducted, have any of them thought to put surveillance equipment in their house? That kind of stuff?
Yeah. No, I thought of that first. And I have put, years ago, I would buy these 700-pound cameras, these camcorders, and put them in people's rooms, and pointed at their bed and so forth. And I got some very interesting stuff. I got people, let me see, 1 or 2 people getting up and walking over to the camera, and this was attached to an apparatus they used to call a videotape machine many years ago, and turning off the tape recorder. And then during which time an abduction would happen. Or I got images of them getting up out of bed in the middle of the night and walking to another room, at which point an abduction event would happen. Or they would say to themselves, nothing's going to happen to me tonight. I'm just not going to turn that video camera on tonight. Followed by an abduction event. Then one time, a woman caught something on tape. It was a blue light in the room. She could see herself getting out of bed, walking towards the window, and she came back from the event, and then she realized that the camera had been on the whole time. So she took the tape out of the tape recorder, and she took it down into her basement, and she got a hammer, and she smashed it into 1,000 pieces. And then she felt a lot better about the whole situation and went back to bed. In spite of that, I have seen one woman there's a huge flash in her room, and she wakes up. Huh? What was that? What was that? And then goes back to sleep. And the answer was, that was weird. I don't know what that was, but there shouldn't have been a huge flash in her room, you know. And I have other pictures of women just getting up out of bed and walking out in the middle of the night and then coming back later, and that kind of thing. And so, but no cigar.
Nothing. And no, it sounds like there's a lot of women. I mean, do we have an equal disbursement across ages, races, sexes, and creeds?
Yes, but women come forward more because more events happen to them. Baby gestation, holding babies, that sort of stuff. More events happen to them than men do, and they happen more often than happen to men. So more women come forward than men. I think that's the reason. But in the Roper poll that we took back in 1991, the people who might have had abduction experiences, men and women were roughly equal. And that was with 6,000 people across the country.
That's pretty interesting. How often are these people abducted, especially when they're in more of this training mode?
Now we get to the crazy part. You'd think they'd be abducted a couple times a year or something. Actually, early on, I think even before or after I'd written Secret Life or before I wrote Secret Life, I monitored one woman, Karen Morgan, had her monitored. She had had enough sessions with me to understand the signs in the morning, what was going on, what had happened. And she, I think, recounted 11 abductions in 12 months or 9 abductions in 11 months, something like that. That is the least number of abductions I have ever found.
The least?
Least, yes. In fact,
holy crap.
People have come to me, well, if you think about it this way, if you are abducted 5 times a year, which is not going to happen. If you're an abductee, you're going to be abducted many times a year. But if you're abducted 5 times a year from infancy and you're 40, that's 200 abductions right there. And that's not going to happen. People are abducted, particularly now in present times, particularly ones who are helping abductees. They may be abducted once a week, once every 3 or 4 days, over and over and over and over again, on and on and on and on and on. It's awful. It destroys their lives to a certain extent. They're exhausted oftentimes, and they can't get things together, and yet it still happens. Now, having said that, my sense is, and this is the first time I'm ever going to say this on the media, and I might say even more if it sounds right to me, but my sense is that something is changed in abductees to be able to accept less sleep than non-abductees and get along okay. I don't know whether that's true or not, but in fact, at the rate of abductions, people should be falling asleep at the wheel of their cars constantly, and there should be all sorts of other indications of sleep deprivation that I don't see. So maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. Maybe instead of getting 8 hours of sleep, they're abducted for 2 hours and they get 6 hours of sleep, and you can get along on 6 hours of sleep. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I don't really know it. But if that were found to be true, I would not be surprised that they have been altered in such a way that they can be abducted at night. Now, people are abducted during the day. They're abducted on weekends. They're abducted at night, but they're not asleep. They're abducted watching television. So they're abducted before sleep as well.
That would make me crazy. I mean, does it bother them, having this all happen to them? Have they gotten used to it? Have they just gotten to where they've just surrendered to they can't get away from it?
It's happened all of their lives since they can remember. And when they do remember abductions, they generally, people write me all the time. When I was 12 years old, I remember this. When I was 10 years old, I remember. up until the time from 0 to 12, your brain is still developing, essentially. And I don't know what it is about memory, but kids tend to remember things happening to them more than adults do. And when kids become at age 12 or 13, 14, they then forget what they had remembered beforehand, except for some incidents. And then they're abducted 200, 300, 400, 500 times, and they write to me and they say, well, I remember when I was 10 years old, this happened to me. What do you think? And I know that if they're an abductee, it's happened hundreds of times. But it is part of their life. And when they get to me, my job is to get them to normalize and not to dwell on it and not to obsess about it. They have a life to live. And their life cannot be around abductions. They've got families, they've got work, they've got whatever they want to do by themselves. They need to do that. They have to lead normal lives regardless of what's happening. And so that's what I work for. I work until they have sessions with me until they can't stand it anymore and decide that their car is broken and they can't it's in the garage and they can't make a session tomorrow. And I know that when I hear somebody telling me that, I know I'm never going to see him again. Mm-hmm. And I think I've won a victory because they don't care anymore. Now, it's like, now let me get on with my life. I know what's going on. I know. I can't stop it. I know it's continuing to happen. Now let me get on with my life. And that's what I want.
But that's good. But David, I am looking at the clock, and we need to wrap up. This has been fascinating, this book. It just makes the whole phenomena kind of hard to believe, but actually I've been kind of playing around with writing another new book, looking at the ancient alien thing, but I think you brought up some stuff that really ties into it, in my opinion. So you'll have to look for it on the bookshelves coming down the road here.
It's a deal.
So if people want to get a copy of this book, where is the best place?
Well, they can go to my website and click through to the book, and everything clicks through to Amazon.com, or they can just go directly to Amazon. My website is www.UFOabduction, no S, that's a whole nother world.com, just singularabduction.com, and or not that, but www.ufoabduction.com.
And I guess your other books are on there also.
Yeah, they're all.
That threat one sounds interesting.
Yeah, that's the one I wrote in '98. That came out in '98. That talks about personal project hybrids and other kinds of hybrids. That holds up in this particular book too. They all click through to Amazon though. So whatever,
Okay. All right.
And
I'm going to let you go.
Too.
Okay. Yeah, all those online sources, I would think.
Yeah, I think there's some bricks and mortar stores also like Barnes & Noble.
Okay. Well, David, we need to go. I know the music is coming up. And thank you so much for coming on the show. This was great.
Well, thanks for tolerating me.
No, you were good. And we'll talk when we go off air. Anyway, okay. I will talk to you later. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And next week, we have our good friend Nick Redfern coming on talking about secret history, conspiracies, and aliens among us. And until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser